What if Doomslayer came into Star Wars? The crimson sky of Exegol cracked open as Imperial scientists tore a hole between worlds. They sought power beyond imagination, but what emerged was beyond their darkest nightmares. An armored figure stepped through the dimensional tear, steam rising from green plates that had weathered 1,000 hells. In one hand, a weapon of impossible design, in the other, purpose incarnate. The Death Troopers raised their blasters. Director Krennic's triumph turned to terror as the stranger surveyed the dark side artifacts, the corrupted kyber crystals, the Imperial insignia. To him, it looked familiar, the signs of demonic corruption spreading across another realm. The Empire had opened a door, but to what? And could anything in the galaxy stand against what they had invited in? The chief scientist bowed slightly. Director, we still cannot predict what lies beyond the dimensional breach. Our calculations suggest we could access power beyond imagination, but the risks are mine to bear, not yours to question. Krennic interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of Imperial authority. This project will secure our dominion across all realities. Begin. As the scientists engaged the final sequence, the tear in reality widened, its edges crackling with unnatural energies that made the air itself taste of metal and ash. The kyber crystals screamed in resonance, their corrupted song rising to a pitch that forced the Imperial personnel to cover their ears in pain. Something was coming through the rift, something that did not belong in their universe. A single armored boot stepped through the dimensional tear, followed by the imposing form of a warrior clad in armor that seemed both ancient and impossibly advanced. Steam rose from the green plates that covered his body, and his visored helmet concealed whatever face, if there was a face, that lurked beneath. In one hand, he carried a weapon of strange design. In the other, something that resembled a vibroblade, but pulsed with energies no Imperial scientist had ever recorded. For a moment, silence fell across the chamber. The Death Troopers raised their weapons instinctively. Director Krennic's expression shifted from triumph to uncertainty as he studied the intruder. "Secure the subject," he ordered. The armored figure did not wait for them to act. His head tilted slightly as he surveyed the chamber, taking in the dark side artifacts, the Imperial insignia, the kyber crystals pulsing with corrupted energy. To him, it looked all too familiar, the signs of demonic corruption, of hell's influence spreading across another realm. The Doomslayer raised his weapon and fired. The first Death Trooper's armor provided no protection as the hypervelocity round tore through reinforced plastoid and the body beneath. Before the trooper hit the ground, the Slayer was already moving, a blur of concentrated violence unleashed upon the Imperial forces. Blood splattered across pristine white consoles as the chamber erupted into chaos. Director Krennic scrambled backward, shouting orders that went unheeded as the massacre unfolded. Death Troopers fired precision volleys that should have dropped any normal target, but the armored intruder moved with impossible speed, each movement calculated and lethal. Where blaster bolts did connect with his armor, they left only scorched marks that seemed to heal themselves within seconds. "Close the rift," Krennic commanded, but it was too late. The dimensional tear collapsed in a violent implosion that shattered the kyber crystals and sent a shockwave across the chamber, destroying equipment and sending Imperial personnel flying. The Slayer advanced through the destruction, methodically eliminating every armed threat. His movements were precise, economical, without hesitation or mercy, the fluid motions of a predator who had honed his killing techniques across eons of combat. When the last Death Trooper fell, the Slayer turned toward Director Krennic, who had backed himself against the far wall. Krennic's usual composure had abandoned him as he faced this unstoppable force of destruction. "We can negotiate," Krennic offered, his voice quavering. "The Empire has resources beyond imagination, technologies that could serve your purpose, whatever it may be." The Slayer's visor revealed nothing as he approached, but his silence carried more menace than any threat. He reached out with a gauntleted hand, lifting Krennic by his throat until the director's feet dangled above the floor. "The Sith," Krennic gasped, grasping at any information that might save his life. "If you seek power, Find the Emperor. If you seek enemies worthy of your skills, find the Jedi remnant. The Slayer tilted his head slightly, considering these unknown terms. Then, with mechanical precision, he tightened his grip. The sound of breaking bone echoed through the chamber as Krennic's body went limp. Dropping the corpse, the Slayer turned toward the exit, stepping over bodies and wreckage. Beyond the temple walls, lightning continued to split the sky of Exegol, illuminating a landscape of ancient Sith monuments and dark power. The air tasted of corruption, of ancient evil that resonated with his purpose. He had been called again. A new hell had opened its gates, and he would answer as he always did, with violence and fury, until nothing remained but silence. The Slayer began to walk, leaving bloody bootprints across the temple floor as he ventured into a galaxy far, far away. The Imperial shuttle broke atmosphere with a shriek of engines, its damaged wing trailing smoke as it climbed desperately toward the Star Destroyer hanging in orbit. Inside the cockpit, the pilot's hands trembled as they manipulated controls, while behind him, the surviving science officer struggled to transmit data through damaged communication arrays. "This is Imperial Shuttle Theta 9 requesting emergency docking and immediate. Audience with command. Authorization code OREX 749er. Static answered, then a clipped Imperial voice. "Shuttle Theta 9, you are departing from a restricted research facility without clearance. Maintain position for boarding and inspection. There is no facility anymore." The pilot responded, his voice cracking. "Director Krennic is dead. Everyone is dead. It came through the rift and killed them all." Aboard the Star Destroyer Eradicator, Admiral Gerard reviewed the fragmented transmission with growing concern. The Emperor's special projects were not his responsibility, but failures most certainly became his problem. He turned to his communications officer. "Deploy a scout team to investigate. Full tactical gear." "Sir," his first officer interrupted quietly, "perhaps we should consult Lord Vader before proceeding. If this involves Sith matters..." "Lord Vader is occupied with the rebel hunt in the Outer Rim," Gerard replied sharply. "We will contain this situation before it requires his attention. Dispatch the scouts." 6 hours later, the scout team's Lambda shuttle settled onto the cracked stone landing pad outside the Exegol facility. Storm commandos emerged in formation. Their specialized black armor designed for stealth and combat in the harshest environments. Their captain signaled the team to advance toward the temple entrance, where the massive doors had been forced open. "Life signs?" he asked through the comm. "Negative, sir. But there's significant interference from the temple itself." The captain nodded. Exegol's dark energy was well documented for disrupting Imperial technology. "Proceed with caution. Weapons hot." They entered the temple complex, their helmet lamps cutting through shadows that seemed to move independently of light sources. The temple corridor opened into the main chamber, where the dimensional experiment had been conducted. What they found there stopped even the hardened storm commandos in their tracks. Blood-painted, the walls, in methodical patterns that resembled both ancient script and technical schematics. Imperial bodies had been arranged in a precise circle around the shattered remains of the rift device. Director Krennic's corpse was positioned at the head of this macabre display, his chest cavity opened and emptied. "By the Emperor," one commando whispered. "Maintain calm discipline," the captain ordered, though his own voice had tightened. "Search the facility. Find whatever did this." They found nothing but more death as they moved deeper into the complex. Laboratories had been systematically destroyed, with particular attention paid to anything containing kyber crystals or Sith artifacts. Security recordings had been corrupted, showing only static interspersed with frame fragments of a green armored figure moving with unnatural speed. In the lowest level of the facility, they discovered a makeshift workshop where Imperial equipment had been disassembled and reconfigured. Weapons had been modified, armor components repurposed, and a crude map of the galaxy had been drawn on the wall with what appeared to be dried blood. Several key systems had been marked: Mustafar, Malachor, Dathomir, Korriban, all worlds strong with the dark side of the Force. Coruscant, the Imperial capital, had been circled repeatedly, the blood so thick it still glistened wetly in their helmet lights. "Sir," the team's communications specialist called out. "I've accessed a partial recording from the facility logs. It's the last entry before the systems failed." The holographic playback flickered to life, showing a junior scientist speaking hurriedly into a recorder. His uniform was spattered with blood, and fear had stripped his imperial composure. "It isn't human," the recording stated. "The armor it wears isn't technology we understand. It seems to feed on violence itself, growing stronger with each kill. Director Krennic thought we were accessing another dimension, but I believe we've opened a portal to something worse." The ancient Sith texts referred to a realm of perpetual torment, a hell dimension where, the scientist glanced over his shoulder, eyes widening. "It found the archives. It knows where the other temples are. Force help us all, it's coming." The recording ended with a blur of movement and a spray of blood across the lens. The captain switched to the secure command channel. "Admiral, we've confirmed hostiles. Request immediate orbital bombardment of this entire complex." "Negative," came the Admiral's response. "The Emperor has taken personal interest in this situation. Secure any remaining research data for transport." "Sir, with respect, whatever was here is no longer contained. It's hunting Sith temples." There was a long pause before the Admiral responded. "Then perhaps it will soon encounter Lord Vader. That would be most illuminating. Complete your mission, Captain." As the Storm Commandos gathered what intact data cores remained, none of them noticed the silent figure watching from the shadows above, or the fact that their communications had been compromised. The Slayer had already learned much about this galaxy, its empire, and the dark power that flowed through certain individuals and places. He had a new crusade now. The names and coordinates extracted from Imperial databanks would guide his path. First Dathomir, then the others, until he reached the core of the corruption, this Emperor who commanded forces that reeked of familiar evil. The Slayer watched the Imperial soldiers finish their work and depart. He made no move to stop them. They would spread word of his arrival, and fear would precede him. Fear always made the demons easier to find. They became reckless, gathered together, tried to perform rituals for protection. It would make the slaughter more efficient. He turned away from the departing shuttle, moving toward a small Imperial transport he had modified with components stripped from the facility. The navigation system was primitive compared to what he was accustomed to, but it would serve his purpose. The ship lifted off silently, keeping to the shadow of a massive temple spire as the Imperial shuttle disappeared into the atmosphere. Then, with a burst of engines, the Slayer's vessel shot upward into the crimson sky, departing Exegol for the first stop on his blood-soaked pilgrimage. The Night Sisters of Dathomir had survived the Empire's purges through secrecy and sacrifice. Their numbers had dwindled since the Clone Wars, but those who remained had grown stronger, more desperate, their magic taking darker forms as they struggled to preserve their ancient ways. Deep within the misty forests, their temple pulsed with emerald energy that flowed from the heart of the planet itself, channeled through ritual and blood. Mother Talzin's successor, a withered crone named Gethsera, sensed the disturbance first a wound in the Force, approaching their world like a storm front. She gathered her sisters in the ritual chamber, where the waters of life bubbled in their sacred pool, illuminated by floating spheres of witchlight. "Something comes," Gethsera announced, her voice echoing unnaturally. "Not Sith, not Jedi, yet connected to the Force in ways I have never felt. Prepare the temple defenses." The younger Night Sisters exchanged worried glances. "Could it be the Empire again?" one asked. "No," Gethsera replied, dipping gnarled fingers into the pool. The water turned black at her touch, revealing visions of destruction on Exegol. "This entity hunts users of the dark side. It believes us to be something else, something from its own realm. Then we will show it the power of Dathomir," declared Sira, the most ambitious of the younger sisters. "If it fears dark power, we shall give it reason." Githzera's eyes narrowed. Fool girl. This is not an enemy to challenge directly. We must. A tremendous impact shook the temple, sending dust cascading from ancient stone ceilings. The Night Sisters steadied themselves as a second impact followed, then a third, each one closer than the last. It breaches the outer sanctum, Githzera hissed. Sisters, to your positions. The ichor missed first, then the spirit weaving. Drive it back long enough for me to complete the banishment ritual. Throughout the temple, Night Sisters took defensive positions, armed with energy bows and sacrificial daggers that glowed with magic. They ignited braziers of green fire that filled corridors with toxic mist, summoned guardian spirits from the bones of fallen warriors, and prepared ambush points where concentrated spellcraft could trap or destroy an intruder. When the Slayer entered the temple's main corridor, he encountered not soldiers but mist emerald vapors that swirled around his armor, seeking entry through any seam. His visor detected the mist's corrosive properties instantly. This was no natural phenomenon but something engineered for death, similar to the toxic environments Hell had deployed against him countless times. His armor sealed automatically, filtration systems engaging as he strode forward. Where the mist touched his armor, it hissed and bubbled, but could not penetrate. Inside his helmet, environmental warnings flashed across his HUD, cataloging the strange energies that permeated this place. Not hellfire, but something adjacent corrupted life force manipulated by technological means. The first Night Sister attacked from above, dropping silently from the shadows of the ceiling. Her magic-enhanced strength drove a ritual blade toward a joint in the Slayer's armor. He pivoted with inhuman speed, catching her wrist mid-strike and applying precise pressure. Bones shattered beneath his grip. The Night Sister did not scream. Instead, her body erupted with green energy that arced toward the Slayer's armor, seeking to invade his systems. He released her and stepped back, watching dispassionately as his armor absorbed and neutralized the attack. More Night Sisters emerged from side passages, firing energy bows that launched arcane projectiles. The Slayer's response was immediate and overwhelming. His shotgun roared, transforming 3 attackers into red mist before they could raise defensive shields. The others retreated, chanting incantations that raised barriers of woven spirit energy between themselves and the intruder. The Slayer assessed the barriers, recognizing their composition as similar to the spectral defenses he had encountered in previous campaigns. He holstered his shotgun and drew a different weapon, one he had modified using components from the Imperial facility on Exegol. The plasma rifle had been calibrated to disrupt the specific energy frequencies he had encountered in this galaxy. The weapon discharged a concentrated burst that shattered the spirit barrier. Behind it, Night Sisters scrambled to establish a secondary defense, but the Slayer was already among them. What followed was not combat but execution, methodical, efficient, and utterly without mercy. Where magic failed, the Night Sisters attempted physical attacks, revealing strength and agility beyond normal human capability. It made no difference. One by one they fell, their enhanced bodies no match for the Slayer's brutal efficiency. Those who attempted to flee were pursued and eliminated with the same cold precision. The Slayer moved through the temple like a force of nature, unstoppable and implacable. In the heart of the temple, Mother Githzera sensed the deaths of her sisters as extinguished flames in the Force. She stood within a circle of power, ancient Dathomirian symbols inscribed in blood around her feet. The banishment ritual required time she no longer had, but perhaps another approach remained. When the Slayer entered the inner sanctum, he found the ancient witch floating above the sacred pool, her body contorted as green energy swirled around her like a cocoon. The waters below her boiled and rose in tendrils that took the forms of warriors, beasts, and machines of war phantoms drawn from the Slayer's own memories. "I see you now, Outlander," Githzera's voice echoed, unnaturally amplified. "I have looked into the void between worlds and glimpsed your truth. You are not so different from us. You channel death as we channel life." The Slayer paused, studying the witch and her conjurations. The phantoms she had summoned were accurate recreations of demons he had destroyed, proof that she had somehow accessed his memories. "We are not your enemy," Githzera continued, extending a gnarled hand in supplication. "The Empire hunts us as they hunt all who possess power outside their control. We could be allies against—" The Slayer raised his weapon and fired. Githzera's shield flared as it absorbed the impact, the green energies around her intensifying. "So be it," she snarled, abandoning diplomacy. "Dathomir, feed your daughter's vengeance." The temple chamber transformed as Githzera's magic reached its apex. Reality itself seemed to bend as the witch drew upon the planet's dark energies. Walls became flesh, pulsing with unnatural life. The sacred pool erupted, its waters forming into tentacles that sought to ensnare the Slayer. He recognized the transformation immediately. The witch was attempting to recreate hellscapes from his memories, to use his own nightmares against him. It was a tactic that might have worked against another opponent. Against the Doomslayer, it was a fatal mistake. This was his environment. This was where he thrived. The Slayer moved with renewed purpose, dodging tentacles and blasts of witchfire with practiced ease. He switched weapons constantly, adapting to each new threat with the experience of countless campaigns through Hell's worst domains. Where the transformed temple deployed defenses based on his memories, he exploited weaknesses he had discovered over eons of combat. Githzera's confidence wavered as her most powerful attacks failed to slow his advance. She drew deeper on Dathomir's energy, transforming her own body into something monstrous, a creature of claw and spine and pulsing witchlight. Her consciousness expanded beyond her physical form, becoming one with the temple itself. "I am Dathomir," her voice thundered, no longer remotely human. "You cannot kill a world." The Slayer's response was not in words but in action. He had identified the source of her power, the sacred pool that connected her to the planet's energy. Dodging her attacks, he activated a device attached to his armor, one cobbled together from Imperial technology and his own equipment. A gravitational singularity formed at the center of the pool, small but intensely powerful. The waters were drawn inward, along with the energies Githzera had been channeling. The witch creature screamed as her connection to Dathomir's power was severed, the sound rattling ancient stones and shattering the witchlight throughout the chamber. In her final moment of clarity, Githzera saw the truth. This being did not hunt the dark side users because they were evil by his moral standards. He hunted them because they were the closest analog to the demons he had fought in his own dimension. His crusade was not about justice but about purpose, the purpose that defined his existence. The singularity collapsed in upon itself with a thunderous implosion, taking the sacred pool's energies with it. Deprived of her power source, Githzera's transformed body began to wither, green energies flickering and dying like flames without oxygen. The Slayer approached her diminished form, now barely recognizable as the witch who had ruled this temple. His visor revealed no emotion as he raised his modified plasma rifle and fired a single shot through what remained of her skull. The temple grew quiet save for the creaking of settling stone and the hissing of extinguished witchfire. The Slayer moved methodically through the chambers, destroying ritual, objects and defacing symbols of power. When he reached the temple's entrance, he turned back to survey the devastation he had wrought. Another nest of corruption cleansed. The mission continued. Outside, the mists of Dathomir swirled around him, carrying the whispers of those who had died within the temple. But already his focus had shifted to his next target, Mustafar, where Imperial records indicated a Sith sanctuary had been established under Darth Vader's protection. The Slayer returned to his modified ship and departed Dathomir without looking back. Behind him, the Night Sister Temple burned with unnatural green fire that would consume not just the structure, but the very ground upon which it stood, erasing all traces of the dark magic that had once flourished there. In the meditation chamber aboard the Superstar Destroyer Executor, Darth Vader knelt in darkness, his respirator's mechanical breathing the only sound. Through the Force, he had felt the disturbances, first Exegol, then Dathomir, something methodically destroying sites of Sith power, leaving nothing but ruins and corpses. The chamber's communication system activated, projecting the ghostly blue image of the Emperor. "Lord Vader," Palpatine's voice rasped. "You have sensed it." "Yes, my master." Vader's deep voice resonated within the chamber. "An entity of great destructive capability. Not Jedi, yet opposed to the dark side." "Not opposed," Palpatine corrected, his tone contemplative. "Driven by purpose beyond our understanding. The facility on Exegol accessed something ancient, something that exists to exterminate users of specific energies. It perceives our dark side power as equivalent to the corruption it hunts in its native realm." Vader remained silent, considering this information. "You knew the experiment's purpose." "I authorized exploration of other dimensions, yes. The power to be harnessed could have elevated our empire beyond the confines of this galaxy." Palpatine's holographic fingers tightened into a fist. "Instead, we have unleashed a predator upon ourselves, one that does not feel the Force as we do, yet can resist its power. It can be destroyed," Vader stated with cold confidence. "Perhaps," Palpatine's image flickered. "But first, we must understand it." The entity moves toward Mustafar. "Your fortress houses artifacts it will seek to destroy. Use this opportunity to assess its capabilities. Do not engage directly unless victory is assured." "As you wish, my master." The hologram faded, leaving Vader alone in the darkness once more. He rose to his full height, mechanical limbs hydraulically assisting his movement. The Emperor's caution was noted, but Vader had faced countless enemies who believed themselves beyond the power of the Force. All had fallen before him. This intruder would be no different. On Mustafar, red skies boiled with toxic clouds above rivers of molten rock. The landscape was dominated by Vader's fortress, a massive obsidian structure built atop an ancient Sith cave, its sharp angles rising like a blade thrust into the planet's wounded surface. Imperial guards and security droids patrolled its perimeter while inside, a small contingent of the 501st Legion prepared defensive positions under the command of an Imperial Inquisitor. The third brother paced the fortress's main chamber, his double-bladed lightsaber hanging at his belt. A former Jedi who had embraced the dark side after Order 66, he had risen through the ranks of the Inquisitorius through cunning and cruelty. Now he found himself tasked with defending Lord Vader's sanctuary against a threat even the Emperor approached with caution. "Status report," he demanded of the stormtrooper commander. "All positions secured, sir. Automated defense systems at full capacity. Lord Vader's personal guard is stationed at the relic chamber as ordered." The third brother nodded. "And the fortress shield?" "Operating at maximum power. Nothing can penetrate it without the proper codes." A tremor shook the fortress, causing tiny cascades of dust from the high ceiling. The third brother narrowed his eyes, extending his senses through the Force. What he felt made him recoil, a void approaching, something that absorbed Force energy rather than emanating it. "It's here," he whispered. Outside the fortress perimeter, the Slayer analyzed the installation from a ridge overlooking the facility. His visor zoomed in on patrol patterns, identifying weaknesses in the security deployment. The energy shield surrounding the structure registered as similar to barriers he had encountered before, powerful, but operating on principles he understood. He had prepared for this target more thoroughly than the others. Imperial databases had identified this fortress as belonging to someone called Darth Vader, a principal enforcer of the Emperor's will. The name meant nothing to him, but the concentration of dark energy within the structure registered clearly on his modified scanners. The frontal approach would be expected. The Slayer chose another path. Beneath Mustafar's unstable surface ran networks of lava tubes, natural conduits for the planet's molten interior. The Slayer's scanners had identified one such tube that passed directly beneath Vader's fortress, separated from the lower levels by only 20 meters of rock. It was a weakness in the otherwise impenetrable design, one that bypassed the energy shield entirely. Using excavation charges salvaged from Imperial mining operations, the Slayer created his own entrance, The resulting tunnel glowed with ambient heat from the nearby lava flow, but his armor's environmental systems compensated automatically, cooling his internal temperature despite the extreme conditions. The fortress's lower level contained maintenance systems and power generators. 2 technicians died before they could sound an alarm, their deaths quick and silent. The Slayer accessed a terminal, downloading the fortress schematics, and locating his primary objective, the relic chamber where Sith artifacts were stored. Alarms blared suddenly throughout the fortress. His presence had been detected, though not his exact location. The Slayer moved with renewed urgency, no longer prioritizing stealth over speed. He encountered the first squad of stormtroopers at an intersection of corridors. Their armor, designed for intimidation rather than protection, provided no defense against his weapons. The third brother felt the deaths through the Force, each one a small disturbance that revealed the intruder's path. "He's moving toward the central lift," he informed the commander. "Redirect forces to intercept." Stormtroopers took positions around the lift entrance, E-11 blasters trained on the doors. When they opened to reveal an empty car, confusion rippled through their ranks. The explosion that followed came from behind them. The Slayer had used the lift as a diversion while he accessed maintenance shafts to flank their position. The third brother arrived to find the corridor littered with white-armored bodies, some still smoldering from plasma burns, others torn apart by hypervelocity projectiles. The brutality of the scene gave even the hardened Inquisitor pause. "Seal the relic chamber," he ordered through his comlink. "Initiate Protocol Zero." Protocol Zero was a last resort, the systematic destruction of all Sith artifacts within the fortress to prevent their capture. Lord Vader would be furious, but better his anger than the Emperor's should the relics fall into enemy hands. The Slayer reached the antechamber outside the relic room just as the massive blast doors began to close. His enhanced strength allowed him to force the doors apart long enough to slip through, though the effort visibly taxed even his capabilities. Inside, he found Vader's personal guard, specialized stormtroopers with electrostaff weapons and armor reinforced against lightsaber attacks. They moved to engage him with disciplined coordination, their training evident in their synchronized approach. The Slayer responded with calculated violence, using their formations against them in the confined space. Where they expected an opponent to retreat from their advance, he pushed forward into their ranks. Where they attempted to encircle him, he created distance with explosive force. The battle was brief and decisive. When the last guard fell, the Slayer surveyed the chamber. Display cases contained artifacts of various designs, holocrons pulsing with red energy, ancient masks and amulets, crystalline structures that seemed to bend light around them. All emanated the same corrupted energy he had detected at previous sites. He set to work methodically destroying each item. Some resisted conventional damage, requiring specific countermeasures. A mask screamed in an ancient language when he attempted to crush it, forcing him to employ a modified plasma burst that reduced it to ash. A pyramid-shaped holocron released shadow creatures when damaged, ethereal forms that attempted to possess him before being shredded by his energy weapons. The third brother watched this destruction through security monitors, his anger building with each priceless artifact lost. Lord Vader had collected these relics over many years, each one a repository of Sith knowledge and power. The Inquisitor made his decision despite orders to observe and report. He would engage the intruder himself. The Slayer had nearly completed his task when the chamber's main doors opened. The third brother entered alone, his double-bladed lightsaber ignited and spinning in a defensive pattern. "Enough," the Inquisitor declared, his voice amplified by his helmet. "You have caused sufficient damage, creature. Now you will answer for it." The Slayer turned slowly, assessing this new threat. The weapon was unlike others. He had encountered a blade of contained energy that registered on his scanners as capable of cutting through nearly any material. The wielder emanated the same dark energy he had been hunting, concentrated and controlled. The third brother extended his hand, calling upon the Force to seize the intruder. The Slayer felt the invisible pressure attempting to lift and crush his armor, a telekinetic attack similar to abilities he had countered before. His armor's systems compensated, stabilizing his position as he raised his weapon. Surprise registered on the Inquisitor's face as his force grip failed to immobilize the target. He shifted tactics, charging forward with his lightsaber, weaving complex patterns designed to disorient and confuse. The red blades hummed and sizzled as they struck at the Slayer from multiple angles. The Slayer blocked the first strike with his forearm, the armor absorbing energy that should have severed the limb. The lightsaber left a glowing groove in the plating but failed to penetrate completely. The third brother disengaged and struck again, this time aiming for joint sections where the armor appeared thinner. What followed was a duel unlike any the fortress had witnessed, the Inquisitor's force-enhanced speed and lightsaber techniques against the Slayer's brutal efficiency and adaptable combat systems. Where the third brother relied on established forms and predictive movement, the Slayer fought with a pragmatic savagery that acknowledged no rules of engagement. When the lightsaber scored a direct hit on the Slayer's chest plate, the third brother allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, only to watch in disbelief as the armor absorbed and dispersed the energy, the damaged section beginning to regenerate almost immediately. The Slayer used this moment of surprise to counterattack, his modified gauntlet connecting with the Inquisitor's helmet. The third brother staggered back, his helmet cracked and internal systems damaged. Through the broken visor, one eye glared at the Slayer with hatred and growing fear. He had never encountered an opponent who could withstand direct lightsaber strikes or resist force manipulation so completely. "What manner of creature are you?" he demanded. The Slayer's response was to advance, his heavy footsteps echoing in the chamber. The third brother retreated, gathering the force around him for a powerful telekinetic blast that sent display cases and debris flying toward his opponent. The Slayer weathered this assault, steadily closing the distance between them. Desperation fueled the Inquisitor's next attack. Drawing deeply on the dark side, he unleashed force lightning from his fingertips. Blue-white energy arced toward the Slayer, engulfing his armor in crackling power. For a moment, the third brother believed he had found an effective weapon as the Slayer's systems flickered under the electrical assault. Then the Slayer's visor turned toward him, glowing with reflected lightning, and the Inquisitor realized his mistake. The armor was not just resisting the attack, it was absorbing it, charging internal systems that now registered as approaching critical levels. The Slayer lunged forward with speed enhanced by the absorbed energy. His gauntlet closed around the Inquisitor's lightsaber hand, crushing bone and machinery together. The weapon fell, deactivating as it hit the floor. With his remaining hand, the third brother attempted to summon it back through the Force, only to have that arm seized as well. "Lord Vader will destroy you for this," the Inquisitor gasped, blood trickling from beneath his damaged helmet. "He is more powerful than you can imagine." The Slayer tilted his head slightly, as though considering these words. Then, with mechanical precision, he tore the third brother apart. Turning back to the remaining artifacts, the Slayer completed his work of destruction. As the last Sith relic crumbled to dust in his gauntleted hand, proximity alarms activated on his HUD. A ship was approaching, larger than any he had encountered in this galaxy, its energy signature massive and ominous. Through the fortress viewports, a superstar destroyer moved into position above Mustafar, blotting out the red sky like an artificial eclipse. The Slayer recognized the threat immediately. His current position would soon be overwhelmed by reinforcements. It was time to relocate, but first he would leave his mark. From his arsenal, he selected demolition charges salvaged from previous encounters. Placing them at key structural points throughout the relic chamber and adjacent power systems, he programmed a cascade detonation sequence. The fortress had been built atop a weak point in Mustafar's crust, a fact the Slayer had noted during his approach. With proper application of force, the entire structure could be destabilized. As Imperial dropships descended toward the fortress landing pads, the Slayer made his way to the lower levels. The path back through the lava tube would be monitored now. He needed an alternative exit. In the fortress hangar, he found his solution, a TIE advanced prototype, its distinctive wings marking it as a specialized craft. Imperial security protocols presented only a momentary obstacle as the Slayer's modified equipment bypassed recognition systems. The engines hummed to life beneath his touch. Above the fortress, Darth Vader observed the deployment of troops from the bridge of the Executor. Something stirred within him, an unfamiliar sensation that took moments to identify: caution. This entity had destroyed an Inquisitor with apparent ease and systematically dismantled some of the most powerful Sith artifacts in his collection. "My lord," the bridge officer reported, "our sensors detect unauthorized activation in your personal hangar." Vader turned, his cape swirling around him. "Target all weapons on the hangar bay. Nothing leaves the surface." The first explosion rocked the fortress before the order could be carried out. The charges the Slayer had planted began their sequence, each detonation triggering the next in a symphony of destruction. The fortress's shield generators overloaded, energy containment systems failed, and the ancient Sith cave beneath the structure collapsed inward. Turbolaser batteries aboard the Executor locked onto the fortress as a TIE advanced shot from the disintegrating hangar bay, its engines pushed beyond safe operational parameters. Green energy lanced down from the Star Destroyer, tracking the fleeing ship with devastating precision. The Slayer executed evasive maneuvers, pushing the TIE craft through sequences that strained its structural integrity. Several blasts came perilously close, superheating the craft's hull, but none scored a direct hit before the Slayer activated the hyperdrive motivator. Stars stretched to lines as the stolen craft leapt into hyperspace, leaving Mustafar behind. On its surface, Vader's fortress continued its catastrophic collapse, eventually destabilizing the tectonic plate beneath it. Lava erupted in a massive column that was visible from orbit, a wound in the planet that would not heal for centuries. Aboard the Executor, Vader clenched his fist as he felt the destruction through the Force. The fortress had been more than a repository for artifacts. It had been a symbol of his power, built on the very planet where he had been reborn in fire and pain. "Track the ship," he commanded. "Alert all commands. The entity is to be captured or destroyed on sight." "Yes, Lord Vader." The Admiral hesitated before continuing. "The Emperor demands immediate communication." In his private chamber, Vader knelt before the holographic image of his master once more. Palpatine's expression was unreadable, but displeasure radiated from him through the Force. "The intruder escaped," Palpatine stated flatly. "Yes, my master, but not before revealing weaknesses we can exploit." Its armor, while resilient, can be damaged by sufficient energy. It requires conventional transportation between systems. It is not invincible. Palpatine's fingers tapped against the arm of his throne. Yet it resists Force manipulation and lightsaber attacks with concerning effectiveness. "It destroyed your fortress with apparent ease. It is methodical," Vader observed. "It targets Sith artifacts and locations strong in the dark side, believing them to be connected to some corruption from its native dimension. Its behavior suggests a singular purpose rather than random destruction." "Indeed," Palpatine mused. "And what might happen, Lord Vader, when this entity traces all sites of Sith power back to their source? When it realizes that the Emperor himself is the wellspring of what it perceives as corruption?" "It will come to Coruscant," Vader concluded. "Precisely." Palpatine leaned forward, his holographic image flickering. "And so we shall prepare accordingly. I am activating the Royal Guard and recalling specialized units from across the galaxy. You will return to Coruscant immediately to oversee these preparations." "What of the rebellion, Master?" "If we concentrate our forces, the rebellion is an irritant," Palpatine interrupted sharply. "This entity represents an existential threat, one that specifically targets users of the dark side. Consider the implications should it encounter those sensitive to the Force but untrained in its darker aspects." Vader understood immediately. It could drive Force users to the rebellion, or create a third faction entirely, one dedicated to its own crusade against what it perceives as corruption. Palpatine's expression darkened. "This cannot be permitted. Return to Coruscant, Lord Vader. We will deal with this threat together." In the swampy wilderness of Dagobah, Master Yoda sat in meditation outside his humble dwelling. Nearly 1,000 years of existence had taught the Jedi Master to recognize disturbances in the Force, to separate the mundane ripples from those that signaled paradigm shifts in the galaxy's destiny. What he felt now belonged to the latter category. His eyes opened slowly, ancient wisdom reflected in their depths. Something had entered their galaxy, something that existed apart from the Force yet interacted with it in ways he had never witnessed. It moved with purpose, targeting repositories of dark side energy with methodical precision. In the murky waters nearby, a vision formed impressions rather than concrete images. A warrior clad in armor that had absorbed the suffering of countless battles, a weapon of righteous destruction unleashed upon those who channeled corrupted power. A being driven by singular purpose, unencumbered by doubt or moral ambiguity. "Unexpected this is," Yoda murmured to himself. "A third player in our long game, perhaps." He rose from his meditation stone, walking with the aid of his Gaimer stick toward the twisted tree that contained a vergence in the Force. Placing his three-fingered hand against its gnarled bark, he closed his eyes once more, sending his consciousness outward through the interconnected web of Force energy that bound the galaxy together. He sensed the Emperor's concern, a rare emotion from the Sith Lord who had orchestrated the fall of the Jedi Order. He felt Vader's determination tinged with an unfamiliar caution, and beneath these familiar presences, a growing awareness among Force sensitives across the galaxy that something fundamental had changed. The balance was shifting, not between light and dark as it had for millennia, but in an entirely new direction, one that recognized neither as legitimate expressions of cosmic power. "Watch, I will," Yoda decided, returning to his hut as rain began to fall on the swamp planet. "Reveal itself in time. The purpose of all things does." The Slayer's stolen TIE Advance dropped out of hyperspace near the Anoet system, its fuel reserves critically low after the hasty escape from Mustafar. The navigational systems indicated an asteroid field ahead, remnants of a destroyed planet that now formed, a treacherous belt around the system's star. Within this field, the Slayer detected an anomaly, a space station of considerable size, constructed within one of the larger asteroids. Imperial records identified it as Cloud City, a Tibanna gas mining colony that maintained nominal independence while supplying resources to both the Empire and black market operations. A suitable location to regroup and plan the next phase of his campaign. The landing procedures at Cloud City were surprisingly straightforward. The authorities seemed accustomed to unusual visitors and asked few questions when credits were transferred currency the Slayer had accumulated from Imperial facilities during his raids. The damaged TI Advanced raised eyebrows but generated no official response. Cloud City existed in a state of elegant neutrality. Its administrator, Baron Lando Calrissian, had cultivated relationships with various factions that allowed the Tibanna gas mining operation to continue uninterrupted, regardless of galactic politics. Imperial officers visited alongside rebel sympathizers, with an unspoken agreement that Cloud City's economic value outweighed ideological differences. The Slayer moved through the pristine white corridors and expansive plazas, his armor drawing curious glances but no direct confrontation. He had modified its appearance using components salvaged from stormtrooper armor, creating a hybrid aesthetic that, while unusual, did not immediately register as hostile in this eclectic environment. In the lower levels, where maintenance systems and processing plants operated continuously, the Slayer established a temporary base in an unused storage chamber. Here, he could repair damage sustained during previous encounters and process the information gathered from Imperial databases. His next target was clear: Coruscant, the Imperial capital and seat of the Emperor's power. But a direct assault would be suicidal even by his standards. The planet was a fortress, its orbital defenses unparalleled, its surface crawling with Imperial forces. He would need advantages beyond his personal combat capabilities. The solution presented itself through Cloud City's information networks. Among the data streams the Slayer intercepted was mention of a Rebel Alliance operation to capture Imperial communications codes that would allow a ship to pass through Coruscant's security grid undetected. The operation was scheduled to take place aboard an Imperial light cruiser passing near the Anuit system within days. The Slayer adjusted his plans accordingly. He would intercept this Rebel operation, acquire the codes they sought, and utilize them for his own purpose. The Empire's mechanisms would provide the key to reaching its heart. Aboard the Imperial light cruiser Suppressor, Captain Nader reviewed security protocols with increasing frustration. His ship carried sensitive communication codes that needed to reach Coruscant for the upcoming Empire Day celebrations. Yet Rebel activity in nearby sectors had forced a more circuitous route than planned. "Double the guard on the code vault," he ordered his security chief, "and maintain regular sensor sweeps for approaching vessels." "Yes, sir," the officer replied. "Though intelligence reports suggest the Rebel fleet is currently concentrated near Sullust." Nader nodded, but his expression remained concerned. "Individual operators remain a threat. The codes we carry would be invaluable to their operations." Unknown to Nader, his fears were well-founded. A small Rebel team had indeed infiltrated his vessel, disguised as transfer technicians during a supply rendezvous. Led by a young intelligence officer named Cassian Andor, they had systematically worked their way toward the ship's secure communications section. Almost there, Cassian whispered to his team as they accessed a maintenance shaft near their target. "Once we have the codes, we'll have 20 minutes to reach the escape pods before they realize the vault's been compromised." The plan was proceeding smoothly until proximity alarms blared throughout the ship. The Rebel team froze in place, fearing discovery, but the announcement that followed indicated an entirely different problem. Unidentified craft approaching on attack vector, came the bridge officer's voice over the comm system. "All personnel to battle stations." Outside the cruiser, the Slayer approached in a modified Cloud City maintenance vessel. Its compact size and minimal weaponry would normally pose no threat to an Imperial warship, but the Slayer had no intention of engaging in conventional space combat. His target was inside the vessel, and the alerts his approach triggered served his purpose perfectly, creating chaos and diverting attention from the ship's interior. When turbolaser batteries tracked and fired upon his ship, the Slayer executed a series of evasive maneuvers that brought him within the cruiser's defensive perimeter. At the optimal position, he abandoned the controls and moved to the airlock, sealing his armor for vacuum exposure. The maintenance vessel collided with the cruiser's hull, its minimal shielding flaring and dying on impact. As Imperial crews mobilized to repel what they assumed was a suicide attack, the Slayer used the confusion to execute the true purpose of the collision, breaching the hull at a predetermined weak point near an external airlock. The explosive decompression caused by the hull breach triggered emergency containment protocols. Blast doors sealed affected sections, internal force fields activated to contain atmosphere loss, and damage control teams rushed to assess the situation. In the midst of this organized chaos, the Slayer entered the cruiser through the compromised airlock, moving with purpose toward the ship's secure communication section. Cassian and his Rebel team found themselves caught between their objective and the unknown threat that had just boarded the vessel. Through the ship's internal security feeds, they caught glimpses of the armored intruder cutting through stormtrooper squads with terrifying efficiency. "What is that thing?" one of Cassian's team whispered. Cassian shook his head, his expression grim. "Not one of ours, but it's creating the distraction we need. Move to the vault now, while security is focused on the breach." The Rebel team advanced toward the code vault, using the diverted Imperial attention to their advantage. They reached their objective and began the delicate work of bypassing its security systems, aware that their window of opportunity was rapidly closing as the intruder moved deeper into the ship. The Slayer encountered increasing resistance as he approached the secure communications section. Elite squads of Storm Commandos utilized squad tactics and specialized weapons, presenting a more significant challenge than standard Imperial forces. He adapted his approach accordingly, using the ship's environmental systems against them, rupturing coolant pipes to create obscuring mist, overloading power conduits to disable energy shields, and manipulating gravity controls to disorient defenders. Captain Nida, watching the carnage unfold through security feeds, made a difficult decision. "Initiate self-destruct sequence," he ordered. "Authorization Nida Alpha 70. "Sir," his first officer protested, "we can still repel the border." "Our men are dying for nothing," Nida interrupted. "The codes must not fall into enemy hands, regardless of which enemy that might be." Evacuation protocols. All personnel to escape pods. Throughout the ship, klaxons sounded the self-destruct warning. Imperial crews abandoned their posts, rushing toward evacuation points in disciplined but urgent streams. The rebel team, having just succeeded in accessing the code vault, found themselves racing against an unexpected countdown. "Change of plans," Cassian announced, copying the codes as quickly as possible. "We extract now. Forget the time departure." The Slayer registered the self-destruct sequence through the ship's computer systems he had accessed. The codes were now secondary to escaping the vessel before detonation. He altered his course, moving toward the nearest escape pod bay. 3 separate parties now converged on the ship's limited evacuation resources. The Slayer approaching from the breach point, the rebel team moving from the code vault, and Imperial crews following standard evacuation routes. The intersection of these paths would occur in Evacuation Bay 3, where a dozen escape pods awaited deployment. Captain Nida arrived at the bay first, overseeing the orderly evacuation of his crew. When the rebel team appeared at one entrance, blasters raised, a brief but intense firefight erupted. Imperial officers and stormtroopers formed a defensive perimeter around their captain, while Cassian's team sought cover behind cargo containers. The deadlock was broken by the Slayer's arrival through a maintenance access point. His appearance momentarily froze both sides in stunned silence, the Empire's forces recognizing the entity that had destroyed multiple Imperial facilities, the rebels confronting an unknown variable of overwhelming combat potential. What followed was a 3-way battle unlike any aboard an Imperial vessel. The Slayer targeted Imperial forces first, identifying them as servants of the corruption he hunted. Stormtroopers died in waves, their armor providing no protection against his weapons. Captain Nida was among the first casualties, his attempt to organize a cohesive defense ending with a precision shot through his command insignia. The rebel team, seeing an opportunity, focused their fire on remaining Imperial forces while maintaining distance from the armored juggernaut. When the last stormtrooper fell, an uneasy moment of assessment passed between Cassian's team and the Slayer. "We're not your enemy," Cassian stated firmly, his blaster not quite pointed at the Slayer but ready to raise at any moment. "We oppose the Empire and the Emperor." The Slayer tilted his head slightly, scanning the rebels with sensors that detected levels of force sensitivity. Unlike the Sith and their acolytes, these individuals registered as neutral, untainted by the corruption he hunted. After a moment of assessment, he lowered his weapon slightly. The ship's computer announced the self-destruct sequence had reached critical phase. No time remained for further evaluation of allegiances. "Pods," Cassian ordered his team. "Now." The rebels backed toward the escape pods, never turning completely away from the Slayer. He made no move to pursue, instead accessing a nearby terminal to download the communication codes that both he and the rebels sought. When the transfer completed, he moved to a separate escape pod. Moments after the last pod ejected from the dying cruiser, the self-destruct sequence completed. The suppressor's reactor went critical, transforming the vessel into a briefly expanding star that illuminated the darkness of space before collapsing into scattered debris. Escape pods scattered in various directions, propelled by the explosion's shockwave. The rebel pod containing Cassian and his team oriented toward a prearranged extraction point where an Alliance ship would retrieve them. The Slayer's pod took a different trajectory toward a small moon where he had concealed his modified transport. Both carried copies of the Imperial communication codes. Both had plans for using them against the Empire. But their purposes could not have been more different, one seeking to overthrow tyranny, the other to exterminate what he perceived as demonic corruption. As the pods disappeared into the vastness of space, neither the rebellion nor the Slayer realized how their paths would cross again, or how their divergent missions would ultimately converge on a single point, the Imperial Palace on Coruscant, where the Emperor awaited with plans of his own. The Imperial Palace on Coruscant stood as the physical manifestation of Palpatine's power, a massive pyramidal structure that dominated the planet's skyline, its dark spires reaching toward the stars like grasping fingers. Once the Jedi Temple, it had been transformed through dark side alchemy and Imperial engineering into a nexus of Sith power unrivaled in the galaxy's history. Deep within this fortress, in chambers accessible only to himself, Emperor Palpatine consulted ancient Sith holocrons and texts recovered from worlds long forgotten. The entity that hunted sites of dark side power had proven more dangerous than anticipated, its resilience against conventional weapons and force abilities suggesting origins beyond their galaxy's normal parameters. One text in particular held his attention, a treatise written by a Sith Lord who had experimented with dimensional rifts millennia ago. The account described entities of pure destruction that existed to hunt users of specific energy signatures, beings that had evolved in hellscapes where such energies represented existential threats to their kind. Fascinating, Palpatine murmured to himself, his withered fingers tracing symbols on the ancient page. It does not hate the dark side. It is simply fulfilling its evolutionary purpose. A presence at the chamber entrance drew his attention. Darth Vader knelt at the threshold, awaiting acknowledgement. "Enter, Lord Vader," Palpatine commanded. "Our preparations proceed according to plan?" "Yes, my master," Vader replied, rising to his full height. "The Royal Guard has been reinforced with Force-sensitive recruits from the Inquisitorius. Orbital defenses are at maximum alert status. The palace shield generators have been upgraded with redundant systems. And yet," Palpatine observed coldly, "none of these measures prevented the theft of our secure communication codes." Vader remained silent, accepting the implied criticism. "No matter," Palpatine continued, closing the ancient text. "The loss of those codes works to our advantage. The entity will believe it can penetrate our defenses undetected, entering a trap of our design." He smiled thinly. "All paths now lead to this palace, Lord Vader. The rebels plot their insurgency using the stolen codes. Our dimensional visitor seeks the heart of what it perceives as corruption. They will arrive separately but serve our purpose together." "What purpose, Master?" Palpatine rose from his seat, moving toward an ornate container positioned on a pedestal of black stone. The entity's armor absorbs energy, conventional, mystical, even lightsaber plasma. It processes this energy to fuel its regenerative capabilities and weapon systems. His fingers hovered over the container's locking mechanism. "Such technology could revolutionize our military applications. You intend to capture it," Vader realized, "not destroy it, precisely." The Emperor unlocked the container, revealing a crystalline device of unfamiliar design. This artifact was recovered from the ruins of Exegol after the entity's first appearance. Analysis suggests it is a component of the dimensional tear generator, imbued with energies from the entity's native realm. Vader studied the device without touching it, sensing the alien power that radiated from its structure. How will this aid in its capture? The entity responds to the energy signatures it associates with demonic corruption. We shall use this component to create a beacon of such energy, one so powerful that it will override all other priorities in the entity's programming. Palpatine's eyes gleamed with anticipated victory. When it follows this beacon to its source, it will enter a containment field calibrated to its specific dimensional frequency. And if containment fails? Palpatine's expression hardened. Then we shall learn precisely how immortal our visitor truly is. On the outer rim, far from Imperial centers of power, the Slayer prepared for the final stage of his crusade. The communication codes obtained from the Imperial cruiser had provided more than access to Coruscant's defense grid. They had revealed the structure of Imperial security protocols, the command hierarchies that governed the Empire's military machine, and most importantly, the Emperor's personal schedule. Empire Day approached an anniversary celebration of Palpatine's ascension to Emperor. The event would feature a public address from the Imperial Palace, with dignitaries and military leaders gathered to reaffirm their loyalty. Security would be at its highest level, but so would the concentration of high-value targets. The Slayer had obtained an Imperial shuttle through methods that left no survivors to report the theft. Using components salvaged from his previous encounters, he had modified the shuttle's transponder to transmit the stolen security codes. The vessel's cargo hold had been converted into an armory, containing weapons and equipment specifically calibrated for the coming battle. As hyperspace streaked past the shuttle's viewports, the Slayer reviewed tactical displays of the Imperial Palace. His previous campaigns had been necessary precursors to this final assault. Each encounter with darkside users had provided data on their capabilities and limitations. Each artifact destroyed had diminished the overall power the Emperor could call upon. The mission parameters were clear: penetrate the palace defenses, locate the primary source of corruption, and eliminate it permanently. All previous targets had been connected through a web of dark energy that converged on a single point, the Emperor himself. Once this nexus was destroyed, the dimension-wide threat would be neutralized. The shuttle's navicomputer signaled the approach to Coruscant. The Slayer secured his armor and weapons for the final time, each system checked and rechecked for optimal performance. As the ship dropped out of hyperspace, the glittering ecumenopolis of Coruscant filled the viewports, a planet-wide city where trillions lived under the shadow of Imperial rule. Orbital defense platforms tracked the shuttle's approach, automated systems scanning its transponder codes and comparing them to authorized vessels. The stolen codes transmitted successfully, identifying the shuttle as a diplomatic transport returning from an Outer Rim assignment. Clearance was granted without question. The Slayer guided the shuttle toward the designated landing platform near the Imperial Palace, observing the massive security presence surrounding the structure. Stormtrooper legions stood in formation along processional avenues. TIE fighter squadrons patrolled in precise patterns overhead. The palace itself pulsed with energy signatures that his sensors identified as both technological and mystical in nature. As the shuttle settled onto the landing platform, automated systems conducted exterior scans for unauthorized life forms or contraband. The Slayer had anticipated these measures, utilizing Imperial stealth technology to create a shielded compartment that registered as empty cargo space. When the scans completed and clearance was granted, service droids approached to begin standard arrival protocols. The Slayer emerged from the shuttle in his final disguise armor modified to resemble the ceremonial uniform of an Imperial Royal Guard, complete with the distinctive crimson color and helmet design. The modifications concealed his true equipment while allowing full access to its capabilities, a perfect infiltration approach for the security-heavy environment. A junior officer approached, datapad in hand. Guard designation and assignment. The Slayer presented a forged authorization chip. The officer scanned it, nodding as his datapad confirmed the false credentials. Proceed to Security Station 7 for final verification and deployment orders. The Emperor's address begins in 3 hours. The Slayer moved. Through Imperial security checkpoints with calculated precision, his disguise and stolen codes creating a path where none should have existed. Each layer of the palace's defenses had been designed to prevent conventional infiltration, rebel operatives, assassins, even Jedi. None had been conceived to stop an entity like the Slayer, whose sole purpose was to reach and eliminate the source of darkside corruption. As he penetrated deeper into the palace complex, the Slayer's sensors detected increasing concentrations of dark energy. The architecture itself seemed to channel these forces, corridors and chambers arranged in patterns that maximized the flow of power toward the central spire where the Emperor maintained his private sanctum. The final security checkpoint before the inner palace presented the greatest challenge. Here, royal guards with actual force sensitivity monitored all who sought access to the Emperor's domains. The Slayer observed their movements from a service alcove, analyzing patterns and capabilities. Unlike standard royal guards, these elite protectors carried weapons infused with dark side energy force pikes, capable of penetrating armor and disrupting energy fields. Their training included resistance to mind manipulation and enhanced combat reflexes. Most concerning, they appeared to possess some ability to sense deception or hostile intent through the Force. Direct confrontation would trigger palace-wide alerts before the Slayer could reach his target. An alternative approach was required. In the lower levels of the palace, environmental control systems regulated atmosphere and temperature throughout the massive structure. The Slayer located an access point to these systems and uploaded a modified command sequence, one that would gradually introduce trace amounts of sedative compounds into the ventilation systems serving the guard posts. The compounds were subtle enough to evade immediate detection by environmental sensors, but potent enough to dull force perception and slow reaction times in exposed individuals. As the chemicals dispersed through the ventilation network, the Slayer monitored the guard's behavior through security feeds he had accessed. Within 20 minutes, subtle changes became apparent. Guard postures relaxed fractionally. Scan patterns became less thorough. Communication between posts decreased in frequency. The window of opportunity had opened. The Slayer approached the checkpoint with the measured stride of a royal guard reporting for duty rotation. The guards conducted their standard verification procedures, but their force-enhanced scrutiny had been compromised by the environmental manipulation. The forged credentials passed inspection, and the massive doors to the inner palace opened. Beyond lay the final approach to the Emperor's sanctum, a series of ceremonial chambers and audience halls that would be filled with dignitaries for the Empire Day address. For now, they stood relatively empty, with only maintenance droids and advanced security teams preparing for the event. The Slayer moved with increased urgency now, aware that his presence within the inner palace would soon be detected despite his precautions. Each step brought him closer to the central spire and the corrupted power that emanated from its peak. In his throne room atop the central spire, Emperor Palpatine smiled thinly as holographic displays showed the disguised Slayer's progress through the palace. Every security measure the intruder had bypassed, every checkpoint he had cleared, had been permitted by design. The trap was nearly ready to spring. "Our visitor approaches, Lord Vader," Palpatine observed. "Right on schedule." Vader stood motionless beside the throne, his respirator's mechanical breathing the only sound for several moments. "The containment field is prepared. Royal guards are positioned as instructed." "Excellent." Palpatine activated a communication channel. "Commander, initiate phase 1. Throughout the palace, alarm systems activated with controlled precision. Security doors sealed specific corridors while leaving others conspicuously accessible. The pattern created a funnel that would guide the intruder toward the grand audience chamber, a massive space designed for imperial pronouncements, now reconfigured as an elaborate trap. The Slayer recognized the manipulation immediately. The sudden security alerts followed by conveniently open routes represented an obvious attempt to control his movement. Imperial forces were withdrawing from his path rather than engaging, another indication of strategic intent. He was being herded toward a predetermined location. Rather than follow the expected path, the Slayer created his own alternative. Using explosive charges to breach a sealed wall, he accessed maintenance tunnels that ran parallel to the main corridors. These narrow passages, designed for service droids and emergency access, bypassed the prepared route entirely. In the throne room, Palpatine's expression darkened as the Slayer disappeared from primary monitoring systems. "He adapts quickly," he noted. "Activate secondary containment protocols." Throughout the maintenance network, dormant security systems came online, ray shields and automated turrets that should have trapped or eliminated any conventional intruder. The Slayer countered each system methodically, using Imperial override codes where available and brute technological force where necessary. His progress slowed but remained steady, each obstacle providing data on the palace's security architecture and, by extension, the Emperor's defensive priorities. The pattern revealed an increasing focus on the Grand Audience Chamber, confirming it as the location of the primary trap. The Slayer altered his approach accordingly. Imperial schematics indicated ceremonial observation balconies overlooking the audience chamber, positions reserved for select dignitaries during major addresses. These balconies offered alternative entry points that might bypass the primary containment systems. As he navigated toward the nearest observation balcony, the Slayer encountered his first significant opposition since entering the inner palace. A squad of royal guards had been positioned at a key junction, their force pikes humming with dark side energy. The confined space of the maintenance tunnel negated his usual mobility advantages, forcing a direct confrontation. The royal guards attacked with coordinated precision, their specialized training evident in their synchronization and technique. Force pikes struck with enhanced strength, targeting weak points in the Slayer's disguised armor. For the first time since his arrival in this galaxy, the Slayer found himself facing opponents whose combat abilities approached his own standards. The Royal Guards had been selected from the Empire's finest warriors, enhanced through dark side techniques, and equipped with weapons specifically designed to counter force-resistant threats. The battle that ensued transformed the maintenance junction into a chamber of methodical carnage. The Slayer discarded his Royal Guard disguise as it became damaged, revealing his true armor beneath. Each strike he absorbed fed energy into his systems, while each blow he delivered was calculated to overcome enhanced human capabilities. When the last Royal Guard fell, the Slayer stood momentarily motionless, allowing his armor's regenerative systems to address damage sustained during the encounter. His sensors indicated a significant concentration of dark side energy directly ahead the observation balcony overlooking the Grand Audience Chamber. Moving with renewed caution, he approached the balcony entrance. Beyond lay a view of the massive chamber below, now empty of the dignitaries who would later fill its tiered seating. At the chamber's center stood a circular platform ringed by technological components of unfamiliar design. The platform pulsed with energy that registered on his sensors as dimensional in nature, similar to the rift that had first brought him to this galaxy. The trap was obvious, its purpose clear. The Emperor intended to capture him using technology derived from the original dimensional breach experiment. The Slayer analyzed the containment system from his elevated position. Its components were vulnerable to precision fire from his current location. A series of targeted shots could disable the trap entirely, depriving the Emperor of his primary countermeasure. As he raised his weapon to fire, a distinctive sound cut through the chamber's silence, the mechanical breathing of Darth Vader, approaching from behind. "Your crusade ends here," Vader stated, his lightsaber igniting with a snap hiss of crimson energy. "The Emperor awaits your surrender." The Slayer turned slowly, assessing this new threat. His sensors catalogued the cyborg components of Vader's suit, the life support systems that sustained the man within the armor, and the concentration of dark side energy that flowed through both organic and mechanical parts. Here was a being who existed at the intersection of technology and corrupt power, a fusion that registered in the Slayer's targeting systems as priority threat level. Not the primary target, but an enforcer of the corruption he had come to eradicate. Vader recognized the moment of assessment and struck first, his lightsaber sweeping in a powerful arc augmented by force-enhanced strength. The Slayer countered with a forearm block, his armor absorbing the lightsaber's energy in a shower of sparks. His counterattack, a precision strike toward Vader's chest control panel, was deflected by an invisible force barrier. What followed was a duel unlike any the galaxy had witnessed, the Empire's supreme enforcer against an entity designed for the sole purpose of destroying corrupt power. Vader called upon decades of lightsaber combat experience and the full might of the dark side, while the Slayer deployed combat techniques honed across eons of warfare against hellish entities. The observation balcony cracked beneath the force of their exchange, sections breaking away to crash onto the chamber floor below. Vader used the Force to hurl debris at the Slayer, who responded with bursts of plasma that forced the Sith Lord into defensive postures. Neither combatant gained a decisive advantage as they moved from the disintegrating balcony onto an adjacent platform. "Your resistance is impressive," Vader acknowledged, lightsaber held at guard position. "But you face power beyond your comprehension. The Force flows through all things, even you, whether you sense it or not." The Slayer responded not with words but with a sudden change in tactics. His armor systems had analyzed Vader's combat patterns and identified a critical vulnerability: the Sith Lord's reliance on breathing apparatus. With precise calculation, the Slayer deployed a modified sonic emitter that targeted the specific frequency of Vader's respirator. The effect was immediate and devastating. Vader staggered as his life support systems fluctuated, the regulated breathing pattern interrupted by discordant mechanical gasps. He raised a gloved hand, calling on the Force to crush the device, but the Slayer had anticipated this defense. The emitter was already moving, thrown in an arc that kept it just beyond Vader's telekinetic grasp while maintaining its disruptive effect. Vader's lightsaber movements became less precise, as oxygen deprivation affected his concentration. The Slayer pressed his advantage, each attack now targeting the control panel on Vader's chest that regulated his life support functions. In desperation, Vader unleashed a Force repulse, a spherical blast of telekinetic energy that sent the Slayer sliding backward and bought the Sith Lord precious seconds to stabilize his systems. The respirator resumed its rhythmic function, but damage had been done. Warning. Lights flashed within Vader's helmet, indicating system instabilities that would require immediate medical attention once the battle concluded. "Enough," Vader declared, raising his hand toward the ceiling. With a massive application of Force power, he tore structural supports from the chamber above, bringing tons of debris crashing down toward the Slayer. The Slayer's response was not evasion but calculated counterforce. As the debris descended, he activated the kinetic amplifiers in his gauntlet's technology scavenged and adapted from previous battlefields. The impact when his fist met the falling mass created a shockwave that pulverized the debris into harmless fragments and continued outward to strike Vader himself. The Sith Lord was thrown backward, his armor cracking under the unexpected force. He collided with a support column, the impact powerful enough to momentarily disorient even his disciplined mind. In that critical moment, the Slayer closed the distance between them with terrifying speed. Vader raised his lightsaber in defense, but the Slayer had already calculated this response. Rather than attack directly, he seized Vader's weapon arm with one hand while driving his other fist into the already damaged control panel on the Sith Lord's chest. Sparks erupted from the shattered controls. Vader's breathing apparatus emitted a high-pitched whine as emergency systems engaged. The lightsaber fell from fingers suddenly numbed by interruptions in the cybernetic interface that connected Vader's mechanical limbs to his nervous system. For the first time in decades, Darth Vader felt something approaching fear. Not of death, he had faced that possibility countless times, but of helplessness. His control over the Force remained, but his body was failing him, systems shutting down in cascading failure. The Slayer lifted Vader by his throat, armor creaking under his implacable grip. Through the damaged visor of his helmet, Vader stared into the impassive faceplate of his opponent, a mirror of sorts, another being encased in armor that both protected and imprisoned. "He awaits you," Vader managed, his voice distorted by failing vocal systems. "The Emperor, the source of what you seek to destroy." The Slayer tilted his head slightly, as though considering these words. Then, with mechanical precision, he slammed Vader against the wall with enough force to shatter stone. The Sith Lord collapsed to the floor, armor smoking from multiple breach points, lightsaber lying deactivated several meters away. Not dead, the Slayer noted as his sensors detected faint life signs, but neutralized as a threat. His primary mission remained locating and eliminating the nexus of corruption that had drawn him to this planet. He turned toward the massive doors that led deeper into the palace, where his sensors indicated the greatest concentration of dark energy. As he approached, the doors opened of their own accord, revealing a long corridor leading to the Emperor's throne room, an invitation. The trap had changed but not disappeared. The Slayer advanced without hesitation, each step bringing him closer to the final confrontation. The corridor was lined with statues of ancient Sith lords, their stone eyes seeming to track his movement. The air itself grew heavier with dark side energy, creating visual distortions that his visor automatically compensated for. At the corridor's end stood the entrance to the throne room, a massive arch inscribed with Sith hieroglyphs that pulsed with malevolent purpose. The doors opened as he approached, granting him access to the heart of the Empire's power. Emperor Palpatine sat upon an elevated throne, his withered form draped in black robes, yellow eyes gleaming with anticipation. Royal guards stood at strategic positions throughout the chamber, force pikes at the ready. The circular room featured a massive viewport that revealed the Coruscant skyline, the planet-wide city stretching to the horizon, in all directions. "Welcome." Palpatine's voice carried easily across the chamber, a tone of smug satisfaction evident in each syllable. "I have awaited our meeting with great interest." The Slayer advanced steadily, his sensors cataloging defensive positions, weapon capabilities, and the complex network of energy fields that permeated the throne room. Directly before the throne, his scanners detected the strongest concentration of dimensional energy, a containment field specifically calibrated to his unique frequency. "Your campaign against users of the dark side has been most impressive," Palpatine continued, fingers steepled before him. "Exegol, Dathomir, Mustafar, and now Coruscant itself. Such dedication to purpose is admirable, if ultimately futile." The Slayer stopped just short of the containment field's perimeter, visibly unmoved by the Emperor's words. His weapons remained ready but not yet deployed. Palpatine's thin lips curved in a smile. "You recognize the trap before you. Good. Intelligence is essential for what I propose next." He leaned forward slightly. "You hunt corrupted energy because that is your purpose, your evolutionary imperative. I understand this now, but consider what we might achieve together." With a subtle gesture, Palpatine activated a holographic display showing star systems scattered across the galaxy. There are thousands of worlds where dark side energy manifests naturally or through the actions of those untrained in its proper use. Night Sisters, rogue Force users, ancient Sith cults operating beyond Imperial control. I would direct your purpose toward these threats, granting you the freedom to continue your crusade under Imperial sanction. The Slayer remained motionless, his visor revealing nothing of the calculations occurring within. His sensors continued mapping the throne room's defenses, identifying power sources and structural vulnerabilities. "Of course," Palpatine added, his tone hardening slightly, "refusal means containment. The field before you is calibrated to the exact dimensional frequency that brought you to our galaxy. Once activated, it will hold you indefinitely a living specimen for Imperial science to study and eventually replicate." The moment of decision had arrived. The Slayer had identified 3 possible approaches: trigger the containment field intentionally to test its vulnerabilities from within, attempt to bypass it entirely, or destroy its power source before activation. Each carried significant risk. His choice reflected the pragmatism that had carried him through countless campaigns. None of the above. Instead of advancing toward the throne, the Slayer turned and fired at the massive viewport behind him. The reinforced transparency, designed to withstand orbital bombardment, cracked under the specialized ammunition he had prepared specifically for this encounter. A second shot created a spiderweb of fractures across its surface. "Guards!" Palpatine shouted, rising from his throne as he realized the Slayer's intent. "Stop him!" The royal guards moved with practiced coordination, converging on the Slayer from multiple angles. He ignored them, focusing all firepower on the increasingly unstable viewport. When the first guard reached him, Force Pike extended for a killing blow. The Slayer sidestepped with minimal movement and continued firing. The viewport failed catastrophically, just as the full complement of royal guards engaged him. The explosive decompression that followed tore the massive transparency outward in lethal shards, creating a direct opening to Coruscant's upper atmosphere. Royal guards, unprepared for the sudden pressure change, were pulled toward the breach. Those closest to the viewport disappeared into the sky beyond, while others managed to anchor themselves to structural elements within the throne room. Palpatine himself remained seated, a force barrier surrounding his throne to protect against the decompression. His expression transformed from confident manipulation to genuine rage as he realized the Slayer had rejected both options presented to him. "Insolent creature," he snarled, rising from his throne. "If you will not be contained, then you shall be destroyed." Force lightning erupted from Palpatine's fingertips, arcing across the throne room toward the Slayer. Rather than evade, the Slayer turned directly into the attack, allowing his armor to absorb the dark side energy. His systems registered dangerous power spikes but remained operational, converting the Emperor's attack into usable energy. Palpatine's eyes widened slightly as he observed this adaptation. "Fascinating," he murmured, increasing the intensity of his attack. "Your armor doesn't simply resist the dark side, it consumes it." The Slayer advanced through the lightning storm, each step methodical despite the Emperor's assault. Warning indicators flashed across his HUD as power levels approached critical thresholds. His armor could absorb significant energy, but not indefinitely. Emergency atmospheric barriers began deploying around the shattered viewport, Imperial systems responding automatically to the breach. The decompression slowed as these barriers established a partial seal, allowing more normal movement within the throne room. Palpatine ceased his lightning attack, recognizing its ineffectiveness. "You are not the first to resist the dark side," he stated coldly, "but all beings have their breaking point." With a gesture of his withered hand, Palpatine activated the dimensional containment field. Rather than targeting the Slayer's position, however, the field manifested around the Emperor himself, a protective bubble of energy calibrated to repel the Slayer's specific dimensional frequency. "Direct confrontation is clearly not the answer," Palpatine observed. "Instead, I shall simply outlast you. Every Imperial force in the sector is converging on this palace. You face not one enemy but an empire." The Slayer's response was characteristic of his efficiency. From his arsenal, he retrieved a device assembled from components collected across his campaign, elements of Imperial technology, merged with his own equipment and materials harvested from sites of dark side power. Recognition flickered across Palpatine's features as he identified the Kyber crystal components in the device, corrupted crystals from Exegol, fragments from Vader's collection on Mustafar, and remnants from Dathomir's sacred pool. The Slayer had been collecting these materials systematically, not simply destroying them. A dimensional disruptor, Palpatine realized. "You intend to return to your realm and seal the breach behind you." The Slayer activated the device. Its effect was not what the Emperor had anticipated. Rather than opening a portal to another dimension, it emitted a wave of energy that interfaced directly with the containment field surrounding Palpatine. The frequencies resonated against each other, creating harmonic disruptions in the field's integrity. Palpatine's confidence gave way to genuine alarm as he recognized the true purpose of the device. "No," he hissed, pouring more dark side energy into his protective barrier. "You will not." The containment field collapsed inward, its protective function reversed by the Slayer's device. Instead of keeping the Slayer out, it now held the Emperor in a prison of his own making, its parameters reconfigured to contain dark side energy rather than dimensional frequencies. The Emperor's rage manifested as pure force power, crashing against the inverted field in waves of destructive energy. Each assault strengthened the containment rather than weakening it, the field absorbing and repurposing Palpatine's own power against him. "This is impossible." Palpatine's voice distorted with fury. "I am the dark side." The Slayer approached the contained Emperor, studying him through the shifting energies of the field. His visor registered the concentration of corrupted power within Palpatine's form, the nexus he had hunted across the galaxy, the wellspring from which the dark side flowed into this realm. Palpatine met the Slayer's impassive gaze with eyes now glowing sulphurous yellow. "You cannot destroy me," he declared, I have conquered death itself. Strike me down, and my essence will simply find a new vessel." The Slayer tilted his head slightly, acknowledging this statement. His sensors confirmed unusual energy patterns within the Emperor's biological structure, evidence of unnatural manipulation of life processes. This being had indeed found methods to cheat conventional death, but the Slayer had not come to deliver conventional death. He activated the final sequence on his dimensional disruptor. The containment field around Palpatine began to warp, its energies folding inward like the collapse of a dying star. The Emperor's expression shifted from rage to dawning horror as he realized the Slayer's true intention. "No," Palpatine whispered, his attempts to escape growing frantic. "You cannot comprehend what you're doing." The Force. The implosion was silent but absolute. Where the Emperor had stood, reality itself seemed to fold inward, creating a singularity that consumed both Palpatine and the dark side energies he had commanded. The containment field collapsed into this point before winking out of existence entirely, leaving nothing behind, no body, no essence, no connection to the Force. The Slayer had not killed the Emperor. He had removed him from reality itself, severing his connection to the dimensional plane that sustained his power. Whatever afterlife or reincarnation Palpatine had prepared for himself now existed beyond his reach, in a void between dimensions where neither the Force nor his Sith knowledge held any meaning. Throughout the galaxy, Force-sensitive beings felt the sudden vacuum where the Emperor's dark presence had dominated. On distant Dagobah, Master Yoda opened his eyes in quiet, acknowledgement of a fundamental shift in the cosmic balance. Across star systems, Imperial officers and administrators found themselves suddenly rudderless, their direct connection to the Emperor's will inexplicably severed. In the damaged throne room, the Slayer turned away from the empty space where Palpatine had been. His mission was complete, the corrupted power he had hunted now excised from this dimension. What remained of the Empire would likely continue for a time through institutional momentum, but its dark side leadership had been eliminated. Emergency systems throughout the Imperial Palace responded to the disturbance, security protocols activating automatically. The Slayer knew his window for departure was closing rapidly. He moved toward a secondary exit from the throne room, his purpose in this realm fulfilled. The device he had used to remove Palpatine could serve one more function, creating a portal back to his own dimension. As Imperial forces converged on the palace from across Coruscant, the Slayer made his way to a landing platform where his modified shuttle awaited. Aboard the shuttle, he initiated the final sequence. The dimensional disruptor activated once more, drawing on its remaining power to establish a connection to the dimension from which he had come. A tear formed in the fabric of reality, edges crackling with familiar energies that called him home. As the portal stabilized, the Slayer paused to look back at the planet-wide city spread beneath him. His crusade here had succeeded, but he harbored no illusions about the nature of corruption. Wherever sentient beings wielded power, the potential for darkness would exist. This galaxy would find its own balance now, without the overwhelming influence of Sith domination. The shuttle lifted off as Imperial security forces reached the landing platform. TIE fighters scrambled to intercept, but their targeting systems found nothing to lock onto as the Slayer's vessel approached the found dimensional tear hovering above Coruscant. With a flash of otherworldly energy, both portal and shuttle vanished, leaving only ionized particles drifting in the upper atmosphere. The Doomslayer was gone, returned to his eternal hunt in realms beyond this galaxy's understanding. In the decades that followed, stories would spread throughout the galaxy of the Silent Knight, a being of unstoppable force who had appeared from nowhere to dismantle the Sith power structure before vanishing as mysteriously as he had arrived. The rebellion would attribute the Emperor's disappearance to their own efforts, while Imperial remnants would fragment without the dark side leadership that had united them. The truth remained known only to a handful of survivors, those who had witnessed the Slayer's crusade firsthand and lived to share fragmented accounts. Darth Vader, recovered from his injuries but forever changed by the encounter, would pursue rumors of the Slayer's technology for years to come, seeking methods of dimensional manipulation that might explain what had happened to his master. On worlds where dark side energies had once flourished, local populations noted a subtle change in their environments, as though a shadow had lifted, allowing light to reach places long kept in darkness. Without fully understanding why, they constructed shrines and monuments to an armored figure they called the Doom Spirit, believing it had cleansed their worlds of ancient corruptions. And somewhere beyond the boundaries of their reality, the Slayer continued his eternal mission, hunting corrupted power across dimensions, without end, his purpose unchanged, his resolve undiminished, his crusade infinite.